The depression that came after having your entire life plan fall apart in front of you it's hard to put into words. And if I hadn't talked to the right therapist, gotten on the right medications, I'm not all the way sure that I would still be here. So that should be the last big emotional thing. There are more examples of failures like this that are just So I read 6 books about ADHD so that you don't have to. And I want to specifically focus on this one, which is, as you read in the title, about shame. I covered a lot of these books in the previous 2 videos, specifically about what happens when experts disagree and you're not sure what to do about that, and also about some of the upsides of ADHD without sort of overly celebrating how difficult it can be. Final episode, 3rd episode, is going to be about the experience of shame. And so far, this is the best book documenting and explaining that to someone who hasn't had the experience themselves. It's worth naming the caveat that I, despite the fact that I was diagnosed with this about a year ago, am not an expert on it. This is literally all that I know. All of the 6 books, there are people who have actually studied this and medical experts who are greater authorities than I in this. I'm making this video because I want to share my experience, because that seeing other people share their experience has been helpful to me, and I want to sort of pass that torch along. The problem with looking at, and you'll see this discourse a lot on the internet, is ADHD as a superpower. The problem with seeing ADHD as a superpower is it often, that description often covers over the fact that there is a serious and continual and deep shame associated with a lifetime of being told that you are either slacking or lazy or morally bad, or even if there are not external people in your life telling you these things, having the internal voice and the internal difficulty of constantly committing to things and then constantly not being able to follow through with them. This book, incidentally by a couple of TikTokers, really nails that concept. The title Dirty Laundry is quite appropriate. There's an entire other room over there in which I live where there is literally a lot of dirty laundry. This book is full of examples of, poor personal hygiene being a subject of shame, financial issues being a subject of shame. All of these books about ADHD that I read, I didn't hear as much of a confessional reality tone as I heard from these authors who explained that Roxanne lost her electricity. She was so behind on electricity bills that they turned it off and they gave her a pay-as-you-go meter. That was an experience that was deeply shameful to her. And then she would be later at a bar and would impulse buy drinks for people out of a sense of generosity and impulsiveness that she knew would mean that she wouldn't have electricity, but then she would do it anyway. There's this phrase in the world, which is, if he wanted to, he would. And there are cases in which that is not correct. If she wanted to, she would. She did want to, and then she didn't. We constantly are ashamed in a short summary because we constantly want to be doing things and then are repeatedly failing at them. What is so good about this book is the emotional honesty about the shame that they feel. I am not going to take this camera and point it at the piles of my dirty laundry. When I am struggling to get things done, I'm not going to take this camera and point it at a bunch of dirty dishes or food that rotted in the fridge because I literally forgot about it. There's a salad right now that I got that I just completely forgot about. No one is going in... In the digital age, we are constantly curating our personalities for the internet. I do it for a living, and I try to be vulnerable on purpose. But there are lines that people just don't share certain things. And while we are seeing a proliferation of content about mental illness on the internet, I think it is a net good thing for the world, but it is also worth recognizing that we are only seeing half the truth. We are seeing the public-facing version of that person. And it's worth noting that we are hearing from the success stories. There are people that don't make it because the self-confidence is too low and mental illness comes about as a result. Depression often comes about with ADHD. because self-esteem is so low. So while it is a net good thing that we're hearing about these positive stories on the internet, we have to understand collectively that we're seeing the percentages that rise into the public, and beyond that, the percentage that the algorithms on the internet have decided are palatable enough for public consumption. Again, if I made a bunch of videos about my dishes being dirty and gross, like that, no one's going to watch that. There's an algorithmic filtration as well as a social filtration happening. And that's part of why I covered mental health experts first, psychiatrists and doctors and researchers, before I covered this. I am a non-expert and I prefer to cover experts. I don't like the intellectual telephone effect that happens when non-experts are talking about non-experts. So with that caveat out of the way, I will just focus a little bit on my own story. To the outer world, I appear to be very well put together and smart. This degree that's hiding up here, I got a significant scholarship to go to that school. My curiosity and hyperfixations happen to align with academic interests a lot of the time. And so I have been able to sort of slide under the radar until my adult life, when many of the constraints of school, this is such a classic story. I mean, this is like literally every single book tells some version of this, that, and even Rocks does in this book as well. They're like, oh, you were doing really well when you were in the structured environment of school, and then when the structures went away and you had to structure your own life, that's when the symptoms started to show themselves, because they were the training wheels fell away. That is not all the way true for me. Right now, to close the gap between what my channel makes, Patreon goal is a teacher's salary, by the way, if you want to support that, whoop-a-doop-a-doop. Just to close the gap, I've done freelance work. I've lost freelance clients because I can't email them back fast enough, because I can't get the product to them fast enough. They see me as unprofessional, despite the fact that the work is good when it shows up. It's not fast enough, and so I've lost clients that way. This school I used to teach with my first job out of college. I was a 6th grade teacher, and at the end of the year, I went to the principal and said, like, hey, I kind of think I should I don't think I should come back. I think I should teach high school, or I should do something different. And the principal was like, yeah, I also think you should do something different. In not so many words, he told me, without saying it, that my contract wasn't going to get renewed for the next year. That's the diet version. There are other jobs that I have been straight up fired from as a result of this. I've been not in the principal's office in high school, but in the principal's office as a high school teacher, being chewed out by the principal, despite the fact that I was working 60 and 70 and sometimes more hours per week, trying to just get stuff done. So I'm getting more emotional than I planned. I would be in a coffee shop at 8 p.m. on a Friday, just drinking coffee and still trying to get stuff done. And I would be working on Sunday trying to get stuff done. Like, I would be pressing, and I wouldn't be able to get as much work done as my colleagues. And that constant experience of not being able to measure up to everyone else, not being able to do things that other people find easy, that hits you in a way that is hard to articulate. Getting emotional on camera was not on my to-do list for today, but I guess it is fitting for a video about shame. Incidentally, as an aside, to sort of pivot away from this, part of why this experience of not being able to measure up can be so challenging for people, that was not a visual metaphor, I just was out of frame, I promise, is because we're often told that we're gifted kids when we're in high school, because we're able to hyperfixate on things. And we're so curious about stuff that our curiosity wows our teachers. I was sort of told by many teachers that I was super articulate and super intelligent and super whatever. Like, I internalized a gifted kid message a lot when I was in high school. And so making the transition to real life, where you suddenly are struggling compared to your peers, can be sort of a double blow. And Rox talks about that in this book as well. I don't want to turn this video into too personal of a sob story, but for the sake of nailing the point home, following my graduate degree, after I got a master's in bioethics, I attempted to get into PhD programs. I spent about $2,000 in application fees to various programs at some of the most prestigious and some safety PhD programs in philosophy. I didn't get into a single one. not one, and that was my entire life plan up to that point. Teach high school for a while, get a master's degree, go get a PhD, and be a professor. And again, without like pointing a camera at my emotional dirty laundry and rotting food in the fridge, the depression that came after having your entire life plan fall apart in front of you it's hard to put into words. And if I hadn't talked to the right therapist, gotten on the right medications, I'm not all the way sure that I would still be here. So that should be the last big emotional thing. There are more examples of failures like this that are just stacked up over a lifetime. But if you are constantly told that you are smart and then you repeatedly fail at things over and over, including some of the things that you think are the most important to you, that is a number on your psyche, and it can lead to anxiety and depression. And it did in me, and I was in need of significant mental health support. Okay, I went back and listened to it, and I just did about 15 different takes trying to summarize the last 3 videos in a coherent 30 seconds or so, but it feels discontinuous because I don't want to necessarily just like tie it up with a bow and have a lovely feel-good ending, because that is not honest to the reality that the feelings of depression and anxiety that come along so frequently with ADHD are. It would be sort of reckless to just say that magic wand wave, everything's going to be good. That doesn't feel all the way true. It is also true that access to mental health care is not equitable or equal or even easy for people with a fair amount of privilege. I have still struggled to get appointments with psychiatrists. I have still struggled, and I've talked to many people who have struggled and have had long enough waiting times to meet psychiatrists that there have been significant negative consequences. So I don't want to downplay that reality. Double also because of my other work that you might be familiar with on the vertical video channels. The mental health care system and the healthcare system broadly construed is not remotely equitable across racial lines. There's much evidence to this effect that I've discussed in other videos. So with all the negative qualifiers out of the way, let's end where we started with the concept of shame. Hallowell, the author of 3 of the books that I cover in the other videos, along with John Rady, Dr. Hallowell, Dr. Rady, explain that the diagnosis itself can be part of the treatment, which sounds counterintuitive. But just knowing that when you've been told all your life that every problem is a result of your failures of willpower or discipline or organization, to know that it is not a failure of willpower, and shit, I told you I wasn't going to get emotional again. Oops. Whatever. Full circle, baby. Just knowing that this is part of how your brain works, and it's not a moral failure, can be a thing that is helpful in breaking the cycle of shame. And maybe this is too hair-splitty philosophical causal nonsense. Whatever, I have a bioethics degree. Deal with it. It's figuring out a way to work with how your brain works. Is your responsibility, but how your brain works is not your fault. That distinction matters a lot to me, that sometimes your behaviors are not your fault, but figuring out how to take responsibility for them is your responsibility. I flexed my bioethics degree and then threw a word salad that only kind of makes a little bit of sense. I think it makes sense. Breaking the shame cycle is possible, and I've been filming for 97 minutes, so I'm going to stop. Okay, I'm Charlie. This is That Makes Sense to Me. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the night. Herc. It's been a real slice. That's a Hercules reference. Subscribe. Bye.